Okay, so here I've opened the reference images up inside of Photoshop. And this isn't a Photoshop class, but we will be using Photoshop here to get the texture information from the reference onto the original UV layout. And you don't have to do this. You can use any texture you want. You can go, for instance, to a texture website, and I'll provide links to that. And grab, really anything you want. There's no prescribed or recommended texture. I'm just going to use this to try to be faithful to the original object's design. So with my lasso tool, I'm just going to select this object, copy, go to our UV layout here, and I'm going to delete these since I don't really need them. And let's turn our UVs back on and just go ahead and paste that in. So unfortunately, this texture is fairly low resolution. You always want to work with the highest resolution textures that you can get. I think it's fine. We'll just scale it up and it will be good enough for our purposes. So you can see here I'm just essentially lining this up as much as I can. Okay, and now I'm going to go and adjust the edges to try to get them to fit correctly. So I think what's going to make this easier for me is to lower the opacity of the UVs. And we will actually lock this layer with the lock icon here. I'm going to use the warp tool to try to warp this texture into place. So if I press Command T to go into transform mode and I go to edit, transform, warp, that brings up my warp tools. And I am going to try to target warping just this top corner. So by clicking on split, I can click here. And now if I just grab inside of this region, I can just move this down. Look around for other areas that are not quite staying in the lines here. Okay, so now that I've adjusted the position of this texture, I can do a clone tool to get rid of some of this extra information. Before I do that, I want to duplicate this layer and we'll hide it. The easiest way is to actually disable UVs and use either the clone stamp tool or one of the other many tools that we have available to us. I like using the patch tool. And it doesn't matter necessarily that we're not making this look perfect, as long as it looks okay where the UVs match up. Okay, so that looks good. We might want to adjust this as well. There we go. Okay, I think this seam may need to be higher on our UV map here because we want the seam to be here, and right now it's down here. So let's see what we can do to change that. Okay, and now we have the seam lining up with that corner there. This looks good here. And let's just remove this bracket. Okay, we're getting a little bit too bright here, so let's try this again. That might be okay. So let's save this. And let's see what it looks like on our model. So save, export, PNG. And I'm going to overwrite my color PNG image. And let's just reload that texture. So go to shading view. We'll just pick it again. And now we have our texture here in the 3D viewport. You can see that the other parts of our model that we didn't yet texture are still using that white material. Let's go to layout view. Now I'm going to repeat this process so I can texture the rest of our object and the other parts of our chair that we have in our scene. So now I've done some work to get the texture information to also apply to the edge banding, including that inside corner. And I just used a more general wood texture for this, so it would have some contrast to the side wood texture. Disable UVs, File, Export, Export as Ping. Let's overwrite the color PNG. Back in Blender, we will reload this. And now you can see our wood texture is also applied to the banding. Now, some of the highlights from the original image are kind of baked in here, so I might go in and clean that up a little bit so that the seam is not quite as jarring. So that kind of covers the basic workflow of getting your UVs into Photoshop, applying a texture, and importing it back into Blender so that you can preview it on your mesh. Go ahead and follow this process to UV unwrap and texture the other objects for the chair, and I will supply some textures to help you along in that process.